All right, everyone, if we can get started here in seconds, if you want to grab any food or drinks before we get started, please do that now. We're going to get started in just a moment. All right. Again, there's no speaker, right? So we'll speak loudly. All right, we will get started here. Can everyone in the back hear okay? All right, thumbs up. Well, thanks everyone for coming out tonight. Really appreciate you taking the time this evening to be a part of this event. We really appreciate it. Make sure this is muted so that there's no reverb. Sorry about that. Oh, yes, recording. This is coming out of the speaker. So let me just. Okay. Why is it still coming out of the speaker? This is still coming out. I don't know. Who knows? Yeah, okay. We'll figure it out. Okay. Well, anyway, small AV problems. It wouldn't be an event unless you had AV issues to start, even though we've tested it and done our best. But anyway, well, thank you again for everyone coming out tonight to support this conversation about the Kirkwood Volunteer Fire Department. My name is Doug Mitter-Atanda, and I am a director on the Kirkwood Meadows Public Utility District Board, or the KMPUD, as we like to call it. And I am also the chair of the committee that has organized this event. We've got great volunteers on our advisory committee that we'll talk about in a second, who've helped put this all on. Before digging into anything on the details here, I just wanted to say thank you to our KVFD firefighters, current, past, present, future, everything. So I want to give them a round of applause for all the way to make sure that this doesn't got it anymore, and we'll keep going. All right. So tonight we have two real main objectives for the evening. The first is really just to provide the community some information and background on the status of the KVFD, answer your questions, and make sure that everyone's well informed of the current status and some of the things that we're thinking about for some potential options that we can go to in the future. The second is to really have a conversation discussion. We really want to make sure people have a chance to give their feedback on how we're doing, where they want to see the district go and the volunteer department to go in the future. It's really important that we have this nice dialogue with everyone in the community and have an ability to contribute their thoughts. I think at this point, the reason that we're here and need to have this discussion in the first place is that the KMPUD board, which oversees the KVFD, is concerned about the future viability and the way it's structured and how we can go forward as a community. And so in August of this year, our president of the board created this temporary advisory committee to advise and think about and have conversations with the community to think about where we should go with the KFD in the future. Here, make sure to change the slide. Okay, so in terms of the advisory committee, Bertrand, Rick Ansel, and I were the initial members, and then we worked together based on community feedback to put together a team of people from around the district, across the valley, who were community members that were on both sides of Measure E in terms of their opinions and thoughts on that, current KVFD firefighters, volunteers, KMPD staff, and Vail staff to be a part of this advisory committee so that we have a pretty broad perspective as we come together. And when we did come together for the first time a few months ago, the first thing that we decided and all agreed on is that coming out of the Measure E conversation, that the best thing that we could do is try to bring the community together and have an event like this where we can have a conversation, answer questions, and really get the community thinking about these topics so that we know that we're all on the same page. So let me dig a little bit into here what the challenge is or why the KMPD board thinks that there's a challenge that we need to be thinking about. And really what it comes down to is the nature of our department, which is fully volunteer, including our fire chief. And when you have a fully volunteer service like this, the nature of volunteerism is that the quality of service, the level of service, and basically the way that people can come and service you, it really depends on the availability and the training of our volunteers. And we know, and we've seen this over decades, that this ebbs and flows over time. And so if we wanted to have a more consistent level of service in the valley, then we would probably have to have, hire staff and to do this. And to do that, we would have to raise new funds, and we'd have to think about the level of service that we would want to have. And we have to think about the costs associated with that and how to allocate those costs across the district and ourselves. And thus, that is why we are here, is because this is the challenge. And we want to make sure that the community understands where we are and some of the challenges that we're facing and figure out where we can go forward together. Okay, so in terms of the agenda for tonight, we really have 3 topics. What we're going to do is have various speakers from the Temporary Advisory Committee coming up and talking about these 3 main areas here. And so what we're going to have here is a Q&A session at the end of each of these. And so we'll have an opportunity to ask questions. We'll answer as much as we can. I'm going to try to be conscious of time and move things around along. And if we have people whose questions aren't answered, we'll be certainly collecting them and giving that information back later. And at the end of the program, we'll have the slide deck in its 3 sections, again with the Q&As. We have poster boards all over the room, and we'll have members of the Temporary Advisory Committee around those boards so that you can have more of an individual conversation, put sticky notes on these things on the boards, and that way we can collect these, get community information, and then have conversations and answer other questions that you might not want to ask to the whole group potentially. Okay, so from here, I'm going to hand it over to Rick Ansel, who is the Assistant General Manager at the KMPD and our volunteer fire chief. Rick, go ahead.
Well, thank you, and I just want to say thank you for everybody that's here attending today. It's just so important for our volunteer fire department to hear the communities behind us, but also to give us the momentum to move forward and what the next steps might be for us. And I'm not sure how many people are attending via Zoom. Dan, do you have a good number?
40.
About 40. So again, great turnout. Hello, my name is Rick Ansel, and for those of you who don't know me, I've been a Kirkwood volunteer since 2000, and also your fire chief since 2006. In addition to me, we have 3 captains and 13 firefighters, and all 3 of those captains are here today, and hopefully at some point you can say hello to them, or maybe they'll introduce themselves to you. KVFD only has 1 station, and I apologize if some of this is like, hey, we know this, we've been under Kirkwood for all these years, but some people may not. So I'm going to kind of cover the bases. And so we only have 1 fire station. It's located at the community service building on Loop Road. So the fire station is actually downstairs, and the KMPD offices are upstairs. And our operational area is essentially primarily within Kirkwood. However, we also provide mutual aid to areas around Kirkwood, including all the campgrounds, private cabins, trails within the National Forest, along Highway 88. Within Alpine County, we provide mutual aid to Eastern Alpine County Fire, and we respond to calls heading east along the highway up to the top of Carson Pass. So that would include Cables Lake Resort, Cables Lake Caltrans Station, Woods Lake, of course, and the surrounding areas there. In Amador County, we respond to calls along Highway 88 west up to Tragedy Springs, and that's the turnout at the very top on the other side of the west side of Silver Lake. But we have gone all the way down to Bear River and Reservoir, and if the needs for us to go further west, we have. But our response area essentially is all of Silver Lake, and that would include Kirkwood Lake, Silver Lake EID recreational areas, the Kit Carson Lodge, Glasses Resort Camp, and Glasses Resort and Camp, and of course Stockton Camp. And so that's generally our response area. The fire department for equipment has 1 command vehicle, which is parked out front here. We picked up last year. A Type 6 brush truck that the community actually raised funds and donated through the 501c to the fire department. So we have a Type 6, a smaller pickup truck, slight type of vehicle that's really primarily great for wildland fires, but also getting us in the nooks and crannies of Kirkwood when the parking lots are full, or down the campgrounds at the lakes. We have a small Zodiac boat that was donated by Alpine County EMS several years ago, which we use to shuttle patients and personnel across the lakes when we need to. And we have 3 type 1 fire engines. And for those who know Kirkwood Fire, you go, well, wait a minute, you should have 2 type 1 engines. You've got a 36-year-old Wildcat GMC Grumman truck that some of the volunteers drove from back east and had a great time driving it and hitting every bar on the way back. Kirkwood, and then we had a 2006 HME truck. But I'm pleased to announce in the last month, we received a grant through the 501c3 to purchase another type 1 fire truck. And it's a Rosenbauer, it's a Rosenbauer. Essentially, it's a Timberwolf, but basically it's a full-size fire truck that'll be able to serve the needs of the community. It's a 2017, so we're going to retire, surplus the oldest truck, the 37-year-old, 36-year-old truck, and put that new fire truck into service. And so when we do, we'll formally announce it. We'll have a pushback ceremony at the fire station where we'll literally, the volunteers will get together, push the truck back into the fire pit, put it into service. So, and that again is because of the community's generous donations over the years through the summer festivals and all the other special events and fundraising that we're doing, and just general donations again, allowed us to purchase this truck. So we're glad we're able to make a good on our commitment to buy a truck for the department. You may recall the department used to own an ambulance. It was a BLS ambulance that was actually donated through Alpine County EMS to the fire department. However, due to the lack of the necessary requirement of having at least 2 EMTs, we were unable to operate the ambulance after several years. And so we eventually returned the vehicle back to Alpine County. We're currently using it as a search and rescue command post vehicle. And I should also note that in both Alpine and Amador County, the counties do not operate an ambulance service. So we're not alone in that. And so we rely on others to provide EMS services. In Amador County, it's American Legion Ambulance, and in Alpine County, it's either we call it Lake Valley Medic 7, but it's the Eldorado Medical Services for Upslope, and it's Douglas County Rescue. Yeah, that's kind of the backup. They come from Douglas County, Nevada. So that's our EMS side of business. There were a couple questions that came through when we asked you to reply to if you had any questions about tonight and so forth. One of the questions is, well, how do you get dispatched? The PDSD, our fire department is dispatched in 2 different. Let me take a step back here. It's complicated to explain, but it's also complicated to deal with that on the road. Essentially, we are located in 3 different counties: Alpine, Amador, Eldorado. We are dispatched through 2 communication centers. In Alpine County, it's via Douglas Communications, which is in Minden, Nevada. And in Amador County, the initial calls go through a PSAP, basically a CHP public safety system. And that call goes from Amador SO to Camino. And Camino essentially runs the calls for the Amador side of Kirkwood. So no matter where the call originates from, fire department members have to remember, okay, I'm in Alpine County, I'm going to work this call through Douglas County Dispatch and get the additional mutual aid resources from Alpine, knowing that's going to be Lake Valley, Eastern Alpine County, so forth. If we drive west on 88, or sometimes if we're on the west side of the valley, it's going to be Amador County. And so we run the call through Amador. We ask the Amador Fire Protection District to come up if we need them. We use American Legion Ambulance. And in some cases, if the spurs close, we may divert and just say, okay, we want the resources to come from South Lake Tahoe, so we know they can get here. So it gets very confusing. And we are in the process, collectively, the fire chiefs in the region, to try to simplify this, but it's not going to happen overnight. And may not happen in my lifetime, but anyway, it's very complicated. If you have more questions about how we get dispatched or what gets dispatched to a call, happy to answer these questions later. For staffing, staffing and guaranteeing volunteers, staffing and guaranteeing volunteers to respond to calls has been historically a problem for the fire department since I started. To address this issue almost 20 years ago, the district created a 2-person stipend on-call calendar system for just to ensure that we had at least 2 volunteers show up 24/7. For every call. This stipend, along with offering volunteers $20 to go on the calls and $10 to go to the trainings, worked for a few years, but ultimately was not enough to encourage volunteers to sign up, train, and or ultimately the retention of volunteers. Today, the stipend is now up to $200 a day per firefighter. And we still have a problem filling the on-call schedule completely. I'm very appreciative of our 3 captains who've stepped up and really worked hard, especially this winter, to make sure at least the captain's on every shift. But there have been times where we didn't have volunteers available to respond. So when the shift is left unfilled, like I said, it's happened a few times. The emergency gets either routed through Alpine County or Camino, and then we rely on outside resources to back us up, and or myself traveling 45 to 50 minutes away to get here to respond to the emergency. Volunteer staffing levels rise and fall every month or year, as I mentioned before. And we currently have 17 volunteers on the department's roster, including the officers. This may seem like plenty, but most of these volunteers are new to the department, have little or no experience. Of the 17, only 4 live in Kirkwood full-time. Of those, 1 has some in-house training experience with EMS and firefighting, but the remaining volunteers are learning what they can, and they're trying to catch up, and it's just going to take time to get them to a really good proficient level. But our challenges are getting people that are in Kirkwood, but also people that know what to do during an emergency. And getting these volunteers trained for a proficient level is just a challenge due to the numerous hours needed to become a certified EMT or firefighter in the state. Currently, the fire department only has 2 EMT basics, myself being 1, and only 1 certified California firefighter, myself. Now, we've had volunteers working towards that, but it takes a lot of time and effort and training to get to that level. And in the state of California, there's no longer a volunteer firefighter. It's all the volunteers have to train to the professional volunteer level. Which again, it has to meet all these requirements to become a firefighter in the state of California. And that's just the structure side. On the wildland fire side, there's a completely different certification course and requirements. And this doesn't include, of course, EMT, which has a ton of requirements too. And I'm not going to go into a lot of the details, but we do the best we can with what we have. We train our volunteers in-house, and we do offer an AED CPR class, but that's about it. So we work with other departments like Eastern Alpine County, Amateur Fire Protection District, to try to get into the classes that they're offering, or we do have a 501c3 scholarship from the KVFD 501c3 to reimburse volunteers who want to attend the Lake Tahoe Basin Fire Academy, for example, or go to an EMT class. But even with those measures, it's training and getting people certified is certainly a challenge. So that's our department at the 30,000 foot level. And I know that Doug mentioned that we should have questions after sections, or do you want to wait till the end? Or so are there any questions about our operations that we haven't covered, or maybe people have here in the audience?
Yeah, Rick, I have. So what would the residents of Kirkwood do for emergency services if you did not exist?
You would wait. You would wait. I mean, you would wait for, if it's in Alpine County, like I said, it's going to be 45 to 50 minutes response. Or hopefully, if it's a busy Saturday, like last Saturday, there were 3 ambulances plus a reserve ambulance, all busy at the same time. They sourced from Douglas County, 2 ambulances there, both of those were busy. The closest resource you would have gotten on Saturday at 2 o'clock would have been from Carson City. And that's, if the weather's fine, it's ready to, it's over and out. It's over and out.
You currently have 17 volunteers. What have you had in the past?
Our best I've ever seen was 19. But some of these volunteers are celebrities. Again, they don't necessarily live in Kirkwood. They like to volunteer because it looks good on their resume, and I love the help, especially when it's training. But it's when I first started, there was about 8 or 9 core group of people that lived in Kirkwood, and they ate, drank, breathed firefighting. This is what we did. And but as time went on, as the economics have changed, the resorts operations, there's no more horseback riding, there's no climbing walls, there's no like summer activities, and so consequently, we don't have a lot of young people that live in Kirkwood year round. So we have a few, and we're grateful for them.
And so when you say you cover a shift, do you actually go to work or they have to call?
They're volunteers. They're not paid employees. They're volunteers. I give them a stipend, and I'm stretching that stipend to $200. But basically, for example, 2 of my captains work at Vale's vehicle maintenance shop. They got to stop what they're doing, put their things down, and run to the station, get on the truck, and then respond.
So they're just basically on call? And they don't get paid for that at all?
They get a stipend. So
$200.
$200 for a 24-hour shift. So. Any other questions about operations?
You mentioned dispatch, the dispatch is complex, but as you think about the overall fire service and emergency service, is dispatch a problem? Is it a constraint, or is it just fine?
It's a challenge, especially for new volunteers to understand, one, that they're nervous talking on the radio, but 2, to know who they're talking to and what resource is going to come to help them. But it's a challenge that, if you've been on the department for a few years, you understand the system and how it works. The dispatch centers, the communication centers themselves, they do an excellent job. So we have no complaints about that. In fact, we'll get on the next slide here in a minute. We'll talk about the ISO and how well we do with our rating with communications on the ISO.
But with limitless resources, you would do dispatch frequently, you have it, it sounds like it's a handicap, and you can dispatch maybe locally.
It'd be the same if I had a full-time paid department, we'd still have the communication issue that we have in Kirkwood because we're in 3 different towns. Now, the communications, it's just a training thing. So. Question in the back.
Emergency service, but do you guys also attend the emergency calls for Dale?
We do and we don't. So Vail, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but Vail essentially has a permit with the Forest Service to operate the ski resort, and within the permit, they have to provide a minimum amount of EMTs, or basic first responders. So if it's a slip and fall or someone crashes on the mountain, they'll essentially triage that person, bring them to the clinic. They've hired Barton, and I'll talk about Barton in a few minutes as well. They'll bring them to the clinic, and then if they need an aircraft, air ambulance to come, then Kirkwood Fire will come and assist with landing the aircraft, making sure they get the patient on the aircraft and loaded, and off they go. If they, for some reason, don't have a doctor in the clinic and they need additional manpower to come in and do CPR on a patient, they'll call Kirkwood Fire and say, hey, can you come help? We've got an issue that we need more, quote unquote, manpower. If it's a slip and fall in a parking lot, if someone burns their toast in Sun Meadows 4 and opens the door and sets the alarm off in the whole building, it's happened a couple times. That's actually a 911 call, and maybe patrols nearby, and if they're willing as a good Samaritan and want to come and help, either a medical call or if it's a fire related call, we're happy with the help. But technically it's a 911 call. We treat that call completely different, and we triage it through the 911 system. We're the ones that are going to go. And hopefully Vale's security team has gotten everybody to the building, and if patrol's gonna be there and if they want to help, I've used them at the powerhouse when they caught on fire. I've used them at a different instance, but they're available. But keep in mind, they're usually up on the mountain taking care of business up there, and unless it's like before work or after work, we're probably not going to see anybody from Vale.
Tell me about there's a now, when they respond.
We're gonna talk about the finances in a minute, so hold that question. But Jack's gonna come up with that, and I think Patron a little bit as well. And maybe one more question, so we kind of keep going here, but I see one in the back.
There is a paramedic, representation from Vail, or you guys are the Valley.
Currently, I'm not aware of any paramedic that works for Vail Resorts. They do, Barton, again, they hire Barton to operate the clinic. Within the clinic, I've been told that there's maybe a paramedic, a nurse, on most occasions a doctor, except it could be different. But as far as I know, there are no paramedics in the Valley, either for us or them. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next slide, and again, we can talk about more later if you like. And Doug, I think we're to ISO, good. So some of you may already know, but if not, the Kirkwood communities reviewed by an independent company called the ISO, and essentially they serve the insurance companies, communities, and fire departments, insurance regulators, and others providing information about the fire department's ability that plays into the risk and the important role for underwriting process, essentially to determine your property insurance. In years past, ISO was the only game in town. So if you got insured by travelers, they would go to ISO, they'd look up Kirkwood Fire, and okay, we're going to look at Kirkwood and determine how good Kirkwood Fire is for the community and what else is going on in the community. And then they would ultimately decide what your property insurance might land at. Over time, the ISOs looked at, but not quite as much. Now they're looking at defensible space and other issues, how close your home is to the wildfire interface. But it's still a leading place to go to determine insurance for all homeowners. So ISO comes to Kirkwood every 5 years. They collect, evaluate information from our community on our structured fire protection capabilities. And ultimately, they'll assign a public protection classification, a PPC. It's their new buzzword. What's your PPC? Points are assigned and weighted in 3 primary categories: your water supply, and we have an excellent water supply. We have over 1 million gallons of reserved water in the tanks right now in the system to fight fire, so that we get good scores for that. We have fire hydrants in Kirkwood that have good pressure because they're all gravity fed, and some of the hydrants in the commercial area are like 120, 130 PSI. So we've got excellent water supply. The next way they measure us is communications, and we talked about before that we have 2 good communication centers, but they lean on Alpine County because their station's in Alpine, and they look at Douglas County communication to make sure that they are the best they can, and we get really high grades from our communication side of the business. And then the final one, which is our Achilles heel, is personnel and equipment. Now, equipment, we've got 3 type 1 fire trucks. What they want to see is we've got multi-story buildings in Kirkwood. They'd love to see us have a ladder truck. Now, a ladder truck, a 2-wheel drive ladder truck in Kirkwood is probably not very practical if we got a 3-foot snowstorm. There's no way you're going to anchor that truck out and stick a stick up 75 or 90 feet safely. So to compensate for that, we have multiple 35-foot ladders that takes 6 of us to throw and actually put up. And ISO has been pretty good, at least the inspector I've been working with the last 10 years or 12 years, to give us as much credit as they could for equipment, but we're going to be pretty much maxed out. The Achilles heel, like I said before, is really personnel. Now we've done everything we can to say that we have firefighters ready to go and available, including saying that some of the district staff like myself are, considered like full-time paid fire departments, but we're not. So that's where we took the hit, but we didn't take enough of a hit to not lose our ISO 4 rating, which is excellent. To get to a 3 would be a real expensive proposition. We'd have to buy another ladder truck, which we'd have to actually buy a ladder truck that we wouldn't use but half the year. That'd be over 1.5 million. The other side is why we're here today is personnel. More people we can put in a truck quickly will give us better points on the PPC. So that's ISO in a nutshell. And I've taken so many calls from your insurance agents, from your carriers about, hey, what's your private protection class in Kirkwood? How close is the fire hydrant? What's the water pressure for that hydrant? Are they doing defensible safes? Are they a fire-wise community? All these things are so important to keep your insurance in Kirkwood. So if we ever get to a paid department, it's just going to give you one more feather in your cap to get things going so you don't lose your insurance. So that's all I have on ISO, unless there's any questions. And with that, seeing none.
One question.
Oh, sure.
In order to have an impact on insurance, you have to get it from 4 to 3.
It just reduces your insurance cost.
But it's that simple, that the insurance basically just says, you're a 4 or you're a 3, everything in the middle for them is noise, or does each incremental improvement matter?
It's dollars. So if you're a 10, you're gonna pay a lot more if you're a 1. 1 is like the city's.
Sorry,
What's within the PPC?
between 4, do we really have to get, we have to get to 3 to make a difference is the question.
Yeah, I think you do. I think if you get to a 3 or 2, they're gonna weigh that much better than if you start going the other way. So, yeah. All right. And I believe it's gonna be John Ryder coming up next.
Hi, folks. Thanks for coming. For those of you who don't know me, I've been in Kirkwood for about 9 or 10 years here. I'm the general manager at Kirkwood Property Services and the development team. And I was pleased when they asked me to be a part of this committee. I thought I knew about the volunteer fire department, but it turned out I didn't know a whole lot. I kind of grew up as a kid around fire departments, as part of the community, played in the old fireman's band at times, and it was pretty cool. I was coming across from the office, and one of the folks was bringing in the truck, the fire truck, and this little kid, 3 years old, 2 years old, just yeah, and he got all charged up seeing that fire truck, so it was pretty cool to see. So let's see. I'm going to talk about the volume of calls, where they go for the calls, and what the type of calls are, and how that kind of factors in at the end to response times, which are really important. And Rick's already touched on some of that. Some interesting facts came out of this for me, being on the committee. For example, you might think that 80–90% of their calls happen in the winter when everybody's here, when they may be more prone to injury or that type of thing. Not really the case. Summer, over the last 5 years, they've averaged around 40–45 in the summer and about 50 in the winter. So to me, that was a surprise. It's really kind of a year-round thing. Obviously, the concentration of calls in the winter will be more in valley versus out valley, but they got to kind of be prepared year-round. Moving on. Which one do I hit? Just any of the arrows here? Right arrow. Okay, yeah, let's talk about kind of the where and the what. So as you can see, as you would anticipate, that's about 70% of the calls are going in valley right here in Kirkwood. And that kind of makes sense. The rest of them are split between Highway 88 situations and what we call out valley. And that could be the mutual aid that Rick talked about, where they're responding to help Alpine or Amador. They can do initial search and rescue. They can respond to wildfires. So those are some of the things that are out valley. 88 is going to be more typically automobile incidents and that type of thing. And then what type of calls are they responding to? This was kind of a surprise to me too. 41% are alarms. Just, that could be any kind of fire, CO, alarms going off that they respond to. 34% is medical. 14% is rescue, and the rest is fire. And those have been pretty consistent, would you say, over the last 4 or 5 years, as to where they're responding and what they're responding to. If we can go to the next, I guess I control that. So here's where it gets interesting, and this is the kind of point for my little section here that I wanted to drive home. To all of you as you think about this and absorb this new information for some of you. These are national averages. We're a professional, fully paid fire department that you may be used to in your communities. 911, is a 2 to 3 minute dispatch time. And then they're getting where they need to go in 4 to 6 minutes, pretty fast. Volunteer department's a little bit longer. And then we get over here to Kirkwood, and with our volunteers, 17, servicing this community, that looks not bad, right? Like they can get somewhere in 9 minutes or go out valley or unengaged 4 minutes out the valley and get on the highway, and depending on the travel time. What happens, I think someone over here had the question, if we don't have a presence at all in the valley, then this response time really starts to go exponential on this. And if you can think, if there's ever an unfortunate incident involving you or one of your loved ones, 40 or 50 minutes is going to seem like an awfully long time. And keep in mind that's good weather, maybe the helicopter's flying, the ambulance can get here. So as you again absorb all this, think about if we don't have a community volunteer and partially and perhaps paid fire department that's here and can do it in 9 minutes. And that's the kind of point I wanted to drive home here. If we don't solve this issue, as a community, we're going to be looking at these extended response times that really may make a bad situation horribly worse. Anyway, thank you for your time. I don't know if there's questions, or Jack, you want to step in now?
May I go with you?
Sure, I may have to call on the experts because.
Really understand these things. I don't know all those calls. What percentage of them are people that are residents here? And how many of the calls are visitors that come here in the summer to go hiking? Because I guess the community has to provide all that type of support. And I don't know what is the breakdown between you.
I don't know, do we have that data available?
Not readily available. I mean, emergencies, we're gonna go no matter what, so.
What was the question?
It was how many response, are people in the valley actually footing the bill, for lack of a better term, and how many, would be a visitor or someone coming down the highway. And I don't think the fire department fully has that data assembled. But you can be, as Rich has said, you can be assured they're going out if someone needs help within our kind of area of influence and gonna go help. Not the same way with Alpine or Amador County, they'll come here if they can be of assistance. This is a mutual aid agreement.
Yeah, but point, I think it is this community would like to have a fire department and all those things, but it's gonna cost us certain amount of money. And I don't know how many of you spend July and August, and people come hiking and people come from different places. And it seems to me that if we are providing some sort of protection for visitors that come here for the day, the county or the state or somebody else would be nice if they pitch in a little bit. That was just the reason of my question.
No, I appreciate that. I don't know that we have a good answer to that question or a solution to that, because you're right. It'd be nice if everybody paid their fair share to help us be there for them, whether they live here or just visiting. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so turn it over to Jack Anjanat.
Thanks, John.
Happy New Year, everybody. It's almost here. I'm Jack Anjanat. Credentials, I guess, are I've been on the KCA board here. I'm the president of the Lost Cabin HOA, and I'm on the finance committee of KMPUD. So I was easy pickings for this volunteer committee. What you're looking at here is the June 30 fiscal year 2023 end financial statement for Kirkwood Volunteer Fire Department. Give you a second just to peruse it. So the revenues, direct revenues for the fire department in 2023 were $71,800. approximately, which are primarily derived from an annual fire assessment fee, which in 2023 was $65,000 in aggregate. But a fire assessment fee that's assessed on all Kirkwood structures that have combustible space. So the fire assessment fee is collected in your utility bill each month. And it's based on the combustible building square footage. And the rate that is applied is a rate of 4 cents per square foot of combustible space per year. That fee was set in 1988 and has not changed since. So as I said, it generates about $65,000 at this point in terms of the build out of the valley. In addition, there's a little bit of money in that direct revenue for what's called impact fees, which are fees that are charged on new buildings in the valley as they come online, sort of a one-time front-end fee to set them up with the conceptual fire department support. The balance of money that funds KFDD, because on a direct basis, the net operating deficit is $315,000. The balance of money that funds that is property tax allocations from KMPUD and money that is granted from the Kirkwood Volunteer Fire Department 501c3. That's an entity that was set up, I think about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe a little longer. It's the entity in which all contributions directed towards the fire department are housed, including the large amount of donations that were contributed as a result of the Calder fire. We had a rather large spontaneous contributions to that entity. The KMPUD board, on an annual basis during their budgeting process, allocates the property tax receipts in the counties to various services within the KMPUD family. While it allocates money to, for instance, wastewater, or electricity to keep their loan covenants covered. They're financing those entities. And it allocates money, of course, as it's able to the fire department. The amount of allocation in 2023 of $261,000 is about $100,000 larger than any previous year. To keep the entity operating. The 501c3 had a balance at the end of fiscal 2023 of $568,000. Most of that coming from the Calder Fire spontaneous donations that came in. But after fulfilling recent requests, grants have been made out of that $568,000 for stipends that were paid to firefighters in 2023 and for the new fire truck. And at this point, when those all clear, which will be early next calendar year, there will be about $78,000 of balance left in the 501c3 that are unrestricted for the fire department. Any new donations received or proceeds of fundraisers such as the summer festival that's run by KBFD Last year, the summer festival raised about $40,000. But those will go into the 501c3 to replenish the balance to a certain extent, but that is not a lot of money compared to what we've been granting out of it. And we also already anticipate stipend grant requests coming in fiscal 2024 that will probably be $50,000 to $60,000. So you can see from those arithmetics that the balance of the 501c3 on a general operating basis is rapidly diminishing and evaporating. So it's just this sort of brief look at financial realities of Kirkwood Volunteer Fire Department. It's apparent that just to maintain current operations, financial support of current revenues, property taxes, and the historical fundraising results, not including what we experienced with polar fire contributions, because those are not likely to recur. That they are not going to be adequate to support the operation of KVFD going forward for long. We certainly cannot provide the kind of fire services and medical emergency services that a community of Kirkwood size and constitution should be supported by. So the non-sustainability of KVFDs in its current form is pretty simple arithmetic. We're running into trouble fast, and that's the basic message here. Any questions I can address?
Do you have a balance sheet?
Yeah, there's a balance sheet that doesn't. It does not fold the 501c3 into the fire department. The fire department stands alone since the 501c3 is independent. But there is a balance sheet. I just don't have it to show. Didn't think that there were any real messages that come out of the balance sheet. You want to?
John, I have a question about the KFQD property tax allocations. So to me, see if I got this right. These are the property taxes that the residents pay to Alpine, Amador, Eldorado. I don't know how much tax they really get. And then they send some of that back to us because, okay, is that right? Okay,
That is correct. I mean,
and
they
if that,
collect from a wider geography than just Kirkwood.
okay,
So yes, and of their collection, a portion is returned.
because we're
To the
providing
authorities.
services. And they recognize we're providing services and they should be covering. Is that correct?
No, I don't know the exact formulation.
20% by law. It's written in statute. 20% of property taxes in Alpine County go to handling the distributors. And then there's a lesser amount.
Okay, yeah, so it's
20% of all Alpine County tax proceeds, or 20% of the
20%
Kirkwood people, 20% of what Kirkwood people pay comes back.
So it has nothing to do with being recognized and we're providing fires.
Was it the original setup, was being established, it's non-negotiable. Unless we change, we would require a change in the legislation. Okay, the change.
All right, thank you. So you said this year we collected $100,000 more.
I said this year, the allocation to the fire department from the amount we received was 100,000 higher than any previous year of allocations to the fire department.
Okay, so you had to take from other areas to send to the fire department.
Yeah, the allocation process is one of balancing between many needs amongst the various funds that represent the utilities that are supplied here.
Do you have an idea what is the cash balance right now? Because we are at the end of the year, you are taking $50,000 in depreciation, probably to replenish some of the equipment. The difference between this and a cash flow is, I'm just trying to understand a little bit more about the whole financial picture of, we have to replace
Well,
equipment, and sometimes.
The answer to the question is not simple. And I invite you to attend KMPUD board meetings, especially around budget time. And if you like, you can listen into the finance committee meetings. It's a complicated set of circumstances where you have multiple utility funds and two additional funds, one the fire department, one the snow removal fund, keeping all of those in balance. And one of the ways that that is done is by how the property taxes that we receive are allocated amongst the various funds. And we do have requirements for loan covenant maintenance that has a big effect on that in some of the funds where we borrow money to bring in the out valley service or whatever.
Thanks.
I'm just curious, so it's something like 40% of your calls are EMS rescue, and there's no, I don't see any income or any line on there to charge for that. I have a lot of places that return to pay to get an assessment by EMS. Get rescued, cost you money. Is there no income related to that? Is there that they don't have no intent to?
If there's income that's related to that, it's de minimis. Gets lost at the decimal point side. We, for instance, tried to collect from the parties involved in an accident on Highway 88 for the services we provide in terms of emergency medical services. It is not a practical element, and there is no structured form of revenue that is dedicated the way there is for the fire assessment fees based on the combustible space.
You mentioned the annual assessment. I think I heard you say 4 cents, maybe a square foot, but it had been set some time ago. Is that one of the couple of questions about it? Just trying to get a context. Is that something that's unique to Kirkwood? Is that something that other, fire departments and counties have, which would be benchmark levels? Is that a lever that we're talking about, controlling as part of this discussion, or where does that?
Well, I frankly am not conversant with the history of how it was set up and what the process was. I certainly can tell you that it hasn't been changed since it was set up in 1980. And whether we have the ability to adjust that or not, Bob Epstein, who is the president of the board sitting behind you, is giving me the indication that I don't have to know because there is no flexibility in that.
And then we're gonna talk about that a lot later in terms of.
We are going to talk about financing options. So let's leave that question for a little bit later. I'll take one more and then we need to get on with this so we don't keep you here too long. Yes.
You mentioned that some of the revenue comes indirectly from property taxes. Do we get any of the revenue from the transient occupancy taxes?
I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you.
You mentioned that some of the revenue comes from property taxes.
Yes.
Indirectly. Do we get any of the revenue from the transient occupancy taxes?
What transient?
Short rentals.
So,
We don't get any of that?
I stepped off for a moment. For those of you on Zoom, the question was, do we get any revenue from DOT occupancy taxes that goes to the fire department? The answer is no. Okay, so I'm getting the hook. Back to Rick.
So I answered a question earlier about the bargaining clinic. I just want to touch on it real quick again. Separate from KVFD, the Kirkwood Clinic is operated by Barton this year. It could be anybody, it's just whoever gets the contract. And that contract typically is during winter when the ski resort is open. And it changes from year to year, and they do an excellent job, and we appreciate having the clinic here. It obviously serves as a support facility for ski patrol, but they have limited walk-ins available. And they took a picture of the sign. You can actually walk into the clinic from 10 to 4 and be seen if you've got something going on. Obviously, they're not a pharmacy, but they do have skilled people in there that will be able to help you. Again, Kirkwood Fire gets pulled into the clinic if there's a issue where they need more staff to help. Or they might have an ambulance or a helicopter, an air ambulance, it will come in to do that. Or in some occasions, when there's no doctor, no nurse, and it's just ski patrol, Kirkwood Fire will get pulled into the clinic to help out. Just want to let everybody know that the clinic, again, is not a receiving facility for any 911 call that has to do with Kirkwood. So if you slip the ball in the parking lot, you're going to get triaged by Kirkwood Fire. You're going to go through the 911 system to the appropriate facility. If your house, something happens in the middle of the night, again, Kirkwood Fire is not going to be able to go to the clinic. They're closed, so we're going to take you to the next receiving facility. If this Carson Spur and Carson Pass is closed, you might get lucky to have the clinic and somebody in the clinic during the closure during the day. But after hours, there's nobody. I've sat on top of Carson Pass, not to scare anybody, for 4 to 6 hours, hoping and praying that I could get Caltrans could get a lane down over Carson Pass so I can get a patient, heart patient, to the hospital. So that's just the reality of living in a remote area. If at some point we can get to a point where we have paramedics in our fire department, that'll certainly help. But just keep in mind, we're not in the Bay Area. It takes a while to get to the hospital, as you probably. So that's all I have to say about the clinic, and happy to answer questions later about it. We'll move on to the next agenda item here, which is is the operations of the fire department. And to help me present this is Ann Fleur Perot, our dryer. Most of you know Ann Fleur, and Joel. If you guys want to come up, Captain Joel, Gomez. Thank you. I'm trying to call you Scott Taylor, my other captain. Anyway, Ann Fleur, you want to take it away?
Sure. Hello, everybody. I'm Ann Fleur Dwyer, and I am a full-time resident here in Kirkwood. I'm on the KMPD Planning Committee and a volunteer firefighter. I had first joined the volunteer fire department in 2006, right around the same time as Rick started. I took a little hiatus to be pregnant and kids, and I'm back. So we put together some ideas of service levels that we could potentially provide based on staffing. And I'm going to start a little bit about our current staffing level. Our operations, we're generally able to provide many services to the community. However, they depend on volunteers. And as we've said, the amount of time the current volunteers are willing to put in and their level of training and certifications, which vary from month to month and year to year.
All right. That's strange. I'm Captain Joel. I'm one of the captains here. I'm also vehicle maintenance. I deal with all your snowcats and all that lovely equipment, snow removal, snowmobiles. But I also volunteer here. I started about 3 months before Paul Dorn, and that's kind of what kicked it off for me. But as Ann said, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that, or a lot of things that we respond to. We go to structure fires. We do limited and initial wildland fire, fire alarm responses, landing of helicopters, simple vehicle extrication, traffic control, initial search and rescue, water rescue, elevator rescue, initial hazardous materials response, and low angle rope rescue. Most of these
a minimum, actually, all of them are a minimum of 2 people. As we talked about, you'd be sometimes lucky to get somebody, that's there, sometimes 1. Most of these, we need 4 people. I believe we had a fatality, a car wreck on Highway 88, that we only had, I believe, 3 to 4 people. We could have used, much more than that. And a lot of them are very new to the department. It takes a lot of training and a lot of knowledge and going on calls, to be able to provide you guys, these services. Sorry. A lot of these services as well are put together, for trainings through, Scott, the captain, Spencer Patterson, the captain, myself, and Rick. Stipend doesn't cover that. We do that because something happens to you. We may not know all of you, but we love you guys and we like you guys. So, yes, there is a stipend, but we do that voluntarily.
So. And as I mentioned before, when any of the volunteers are just not interested in volunteering, they move on from the department. We're just not able to provide the services. So we honestly do the best we can with whoever shows up. And if it's on some days, it's awesome. We've got plenty of help and things work great. On most days, it's just 1 or 2 that are responding to take care of an emergency. We're going to talk about some possible options here for staffing levels and all that again. But by no means are we saying that we have to do any of these things, but we just want to kind of put the ability of a skilled firefighter versus a volunteer, what the cost might be associated with those abilities. So Anthony, you want to talk about some of the different options?
Yeah, so just as reference, we have in the red here our current level of service. And you'll notice that it's basically orange all the way down. And that is reflective of whether or not we have people here and whether or not they're trained to respond to those emergencies. And some days we do and some days we don't. The minimum operation in the orange is proposing 1 full-time fire chief and 3 just 1 full-time fire chief and then an all-volunteer department. This structure is similar to how the department has been structured in the past, and we believe is the bare minimum needed in order for the department to be able to continue providing the level of service it has been. This provides for a full-time fire chief to organize and administer the department, prepare and coordinate trainings, and ensure equipment is properly maintained and serviced. As Joel mentioned, currently all of that's being done by volunteers in their own time. This model still relies on volunteers showing up for training and being available to respond to calls. In some events, volunteers may not always be trained or available, specifically for calls that require more specialized training. However, having a paid fire chief does help provide some stability for the department, which in turn helps with recruitment, retention, and training of volunteers. Rick mentioned earlier that when he started, there was a crew of 8 really dedicated volunteers, and having a paid fire chief was really helpful in keeping them organized and motivated. And we estimate the cost to run the department in this manner to start around $600,000 a year.
Yeah, so we got option B. I'm gonna read this off so I don't forget anything. But it proposes a paid fire chief with 3 full-time firefighters / EMTs on staff supported by volunteers. This would allow the department to provide all the same services we have now, but ensure that we have at least 1 certified firefighter in the valley to run the calls and direct volunteers who have varying levels of training. It would also provide a dedicated position for a fire chief to manage the department and be backup for one of the 3 full-time firefighters. The limiting factors with this option is for services which require a minimum of 4 individuals. The department would be limited by the number of volunteers who are trained and available. However, with this type of structure, the department is more likely to be in a position to be able to recruit, train, and support volunteers, and volunteers can work under the guidance of a professional. We estimate the cost to run the department in this manner to start around $1 million a year.
So the last option, though it looks like it's a full-time paid department, really it's not. It's chief, 6 firefighters with a minimum of 2 per shift responding. But with this, again, you're relying on volunteers to backfill, especially when firefighters, if it could be a paramedic level, they're gonna have to go do training. They're gonna have to get CEUs. They're gonna have to continually be in and out of the department to take care of certifications. So that's where you're gonna lean on those volunteers, hopefully pay those volunteers to support the operations. But the long short of it is you get kind of what you pay for. So if you want someone who's able to hit all the green dots and provide just about every service that a firefighter could, you know, this is kind of the numbers that we're estimating. By no means that we're saying it's in stone, but this is stuff that we're talking about. So, and this is just the structure firefighter side. There's a whole nother side that's the EMS side.
Just to go back. One thing to note is that in options A and B, the structure fire or entering a multi-unit blaze is orange on both of those. And that is because of the 2 in, 2 out rule that is an OSHA requirement. And which means that you need to have 4 firefighters that are trained and able to respond to the fire. And those are orange because once again, you'd be relying on volunteers to be there and be trained to be able to provide that backup support to those, to the paid firefighters that will be on staff. So as Rick said, we have, that's the fire side of service. Then we also have the emergency medical side of service. Once again, currently we're dependent on who's here and who's trained. And then currently the volunteers can have different levels of training. And in the past, when KVFD had a paid fire chief, the department was able to coordinate EMT trainings and provide a greater level of training for our volunteers through the support of Alpine County, who had an EMS director. At the time, this also allowed our department to operate an ambulance. Since our switch to an all-volunteer department, this level of training has been difficult to coordinate, and the department no longer has the same number of trained EMTs. When I first started on the department, every year we had EMT training, and any new recruits, most of them took the training and became certified. Current volunteers do receive AED CPR and basic life support training, as well as basic EMS training over the course of their time with the department. Can we read it?
Yeah, I think that.
The types of EMS service volunteers typically provide are CPR AD, basic first aid. We can splint broken bones and sprains, bandage, neck and spine stabilization, initial patient assessment and vitals, and communication with outside agencies. One key thing to remember is we don't have an ambulance. And in order to do so, we need to have 2 EMTs in Valley to man that ambulance. Which means that no matter what, we're waiting for an ambulance from outside to come and help. EMTs can provide, so in column A, next slide. There we go. So in column A, we have a full-time firefighter and 1 EMT on staff essentially. And with this layout, we can provide a higher level of service. EMTs can provide further basic life support, such as administration of advanced airways. One of the most significant improvements beyond the training and knowledge gained by going through EMT training and certification is the possibility of having an ambulance in Valley again. Having a basic life support ambulance in Valley has the most significant impact on our EMS services for multiple reasons. First, The ambulance provides a place out of the elements to provide these services. This can make a significant difference in a patient comfort and well-being. Think of managing injuries from a car crash in a blizzard on Highway 88, or managing a patient with heat stroke in a parking lot with no shade. Secondly, the ambulance allows the department to greatly reduce the time frame for getting patients to the hospital. Depending on the emergency, this can be a big impact. In the last 6 months, we have had 2 calls where volunteers performed CPR for 30 to 50 minutes while waiting for an ambulance. With an ambulance and appropriate EMTs on staff, KVFD would be able to start transport towards a medical facility and meet another ambulance en route, possibly cutting travel times in half. Due to EMS authorities' requirements, the department is required to have 2 EMTs to staff the ambulance at all times. And this does not. This does put additional strain on staffing and training requirements.
that's 2 full-time.
You have to have two EMTs in the ambulance to take the ambulance out.
So it'd be volunteers.
Volunteers, if they are EMT certified, can do that, yes.
Sure. And then finally, in option C. We're talking about, again, the 2 EMTs, possibly a paramedic, and the ability to do more for the patient en route to the hospital. So just to recap all 3 options, option 1 is what we're doing now. We're doing the best we can with who can go get their EMT certification and trying to use them on scene and on calls. Option B is actually making sure there's an EMT on site here, and hopefully parlay that into a 2 EMT situation where we can bring an ambulance back and reduce that golden hour to get you to the hospital quicker. And then option C is, the combination of. But clearly EMS is, as John mentioned before, most all our calls are kind of EMS related, even though the stats may seem low, they're really not. We get dispatched to car wrecks on the highway, trips and falls, and get there and they're fine and there's nothing to it, the refusals, so to speak. But for the most part, they're all EMS related. So if the community could think about that as they make decisions moving forward, what kind of care do you want? That's kind of what we're talking about. So. Yeah.
Questions on this topic? You can also answer questions at the end.
Why don't you explore some other alternatives, like outsourcing some of these services to one of the counties around? So have you explored it? What is the cost?
Well, yes, we have.
Okay, great.
We've been talking about this since I was on the fire. And entertaining ideas of working with the Amarillo Fire Protection District, for example, and offering, getting a contract with them. We've looked at CAL FIRE. We've looked at Eastern Alpine County. We've explored all these ideas, and we're going to talk about some of the options of how to fund the fire department. But to answer your question, yes, there's been numerous committees, conversations within the district, with myself, with other chiefs, to see how we can collectively help each other. Okay.
But what is the cost? I mean,
when we went through Measure E, the cost was gonna be around $1 million. And I don't want to go back in time and talk about Measure E too much. But basically, the community, we felt that we could probably work a contract with somebody else for about $1 million. So, thank you. Yeah.
Okay. I'm stepping in for our group that handled the financial need assessment, as neither of them were able to be here in person today. I believe they are following along on Zoom. But as a committee, the funding of the fire department, as we've kind of covered, is typically via property taxes, special taxes, and assessments on properties. And in Kirkwood, currently, they receive a small portion of the property taxes And there's an assessment that was discussed previously. We will cover these methods as well as supplementary sources such as donations and grants. Currently, our fire department's operating costs are funded by an assessment on properties in Kirkwood, which has been in place for 35 years. And then the property taxes returned to Kirkwood from the counties, a portion of those property taxes. And then donations to the 501c3. For fiscal year 2025, KPFD's budget projects a $241,000 deficit. Depending on how much of available property taxes will be needed to cover obligations associated with our Out Valley electric line and wastewater treatment plant upgrades, at least 100,000 of new revenue are needed just to balance KBFD's budget with the current and volunteer staffing. And then in assessing the financing methods, we looked at 15 financing options, each with 5 different criteria. Here are those 5 criteria. They've not been weighted for importance, though that would be possible if it helps to make recommendations and decisions on how to finance our fire department. We have not included consideration of possible political difficulties, only technical and legal processes and requirements. On the next slides, you will see that no one method seems to satisfy all of these criteria. We will be interested in your thoughts on the green, yellow, red evaluations we have put together so far. So the benefit assessment, Proposition 218, is the first line item here. That is what we currently have, the system we have for our 4-cent per square foot assessment, and is something that we could look at updating, changing, and is a potential option of having more funds for the department in the future. The special tax is another way to do that. And there can be a CFD or a CSD, which have different requirements as you go through the process. The assessment method is voted on by all property owners and requires a 50% plus 1 approval. And the CFD special tax method is voted only by registered voters and requires a 2/3 approval. Both methods require an engineering study to assess received benefit, but we believe we could explore one study for various methods to reduce the costs and identify what the best ways forward would be. The last one on here would be to work on an agreement with Vail to provide some assistance to help cover some of the costs in the services we provide. And obviously that depends on Vail, and if we could come to an agreement, and potentially that's something that could be attached to lift tickets and season passes, then so that it would go towards some of the people who are benefiting from the EMS services that we provide. A few other options that we looked at were trying to see if we could get revenues from nearby properties, Silver Lake, Kirkwood Lake, Caples Lake. This is a question we get a lot. And this would require to negotiate some kind of revised mutual aid agreement with Amador Fire and Eastern Alpine Fire. Or organize the KVFD into its own community service district in which we could look at incorporating different areas potentially. Or charge for services on a one-on-one basis with a higher fee for those services if we're going outside of our primary service area. Second one is, as someone mentioned this earlier, is charging a fee for services. We do this to some extent, but it takes a lot of time. And on an all volunteer basis, it's really hard to collect the information and go through the process to collect that money. And it's something that we continue to talk about improving and would be something we could improve on with some full-time staff that is responsible for managing that kind of administration. And the last one is talking about property taxes. Currently, as was mentioned, the KMPD receives about 20% of the taxes collected by the county for Kirkwood Valley. And about 30, just under 30% is put towards the volunteer fire department operations. And so it is an area that we could consider looking at to provide more funding from property taxes for the fire department. However, that would then also impact the utility costs that are that those funds are going to. And then lastly, there's some supplemental income possibilities. None of these are things that can be counted on for day-to-day operations, but have helped in the past with equipment purchases and are opportunities for us to continue having additional funds for the department. Grants, fundraising activities, more 501c3 donations, and then there's a one-time special assessment, but that is the same process needed to go through for revising the general assessment, and it's only good for one time. You know, it's not a recurring yearly fee. Other things that were considered, thank you. Other things that were considered are development impact fee. However, we didn't feel like that was beneficial because it could potentially limit future growth and increase development costs for people that might be interested in developing the valley. Excise tax. There was legal concerns about proceeding with investigating that further. Local sales tax, civic fee, and increased revenue from counties are all things that have been looked at, but didn't seem to have easy ways forward or negative impacts on other areas in the community that made it not worth moving forward with. In summary, no one method appears to meet all 5 criteria favorably. 2, it seems like we will need at least 2 funding methods to balance the needs and cover the different areas that the department serves. Fire protection, which focuses more on property and buildings, whereas EMS has to do with how many people may need emergency medical service or rescue. And different methods seem maybe more tailored for one of these than the other. Questions on potential financing options? Yes.
I'm sort of been like models that they may use, and one of that particularly curious if there's any precedent for bail in the fire department.
As for preparation for this meeting, we didn't look specifically at a lot of other communities. As I mentioned on one of these first slides, fire departments are typically funded by property taxes, some kinds of special taxes, and assessments, and usually a mix of those 3 things. And in other communities around us that we are aware of, they typically fall in line with kind of a mix of different things in those 3 buckets. And I do know that in certain other Vail resorts, they do provide different levels of emergency medical services based on the needs of the community. Yes. Go ahead.
As I recall, quite a few years ago, something like 3/4 of the entire Auckland County budget was paid by the East Meadows. And you know, this side, the Alpine County side, this resort And I'm just kind of wondering if, given that we're giving them a huge amount of money and we're getting as much back in return, is that a potential lever for getting funding, the fire department? And I may be wrong about these numbers, but I do remember it's striking how much property taxes percent of Alpine County from.
Yes, so they do get a large portion of their property taxes from Alpine County. And there have been quite a few efforts, I believe it's on this side here, increased revenues from counties, the last item. Past attempts have taken a lot of time and been unsuccessful so far. There has been 3 documented efforts in the last 25 years. Yeah, 25 years, and none of them have been successful in getting more money from the county. In the future, the community may want to explore the possibility and pros and cons of incorporation, and if that could provide more funding. But that is not something that's been investigated at this time.
The gentleman over here brought that comment before about when they rent apartments, putting in that part of the rental a certain portion. I think that might be something that the county might be able to decide. This county is very small. When you take, I don't know how many rentals are in Markleeville. Here, I think they are quite a bit. And I don't know how many are in Bear Valley. But that is something that probably can be done at the county level. And we have to explore all those avenues. As you very well pointed out, one thing is fire and the other one is medical. Okay, so the medical part of it, there is a lot of visitors here that should help with this thing, one way or another. I mean,
that will certainly be included in future discussions with the county, the TOT as well as vacation income.
Did you say that Vail does pay for some additional services at other resorts? Did I understand that correctly?
There are some resorts that have greater levels of emergency medical support at them. Not necessarily that they are paying. I don't have the details, but I do know there are different levels of service provided in different areas.
It would be interesting to know how Vail is involved.
So, our fire attack committee actually reached out to Vail Resorts, as well as I have in the past with former KMPD board member. And then there are certain locations in Colorado that kind of do a combination because of the remote location. And we floated the idea, well, we're similar, we could do that too. And so we will certainly continue to talk about it. But that's Colorado versus California, different states, things are done a little differently, but it's on the table and we certainly will continue the discussion.
Okay, so thank you again for coming tonight. This is a lot of information, right? But we totally understand that. Hopefully we've achieved our objectives of being able to give you the information to start this conversation, thinking about some of the options and some of the challenges that we have. And so nothing's being decided right now, right? This is not a public hearing from the district to decide anything. This is just information. This is the beginning of a process, really. And what we are trying to do now is just to talk about what's going to happen in the next couple of months, and hopefully by the end of the spring, provide recommendations to the board, because this is a temporary advisory committee, so it should be temporary and provide some recommendations, right? And so in terms of the next steps that we have, collecting some of this, listening to the recordings, we're going to break you out and ask you to, before you leave tonight, to write some thoughts down. We'll collect these things, pull it all together. We'll provide this recording to the community. You all have hopefully got the email that had the slide deck in it yesterday. We'll pull all this together. We'll start thinking about things. We're planning on having a survey going out sometime in the next few months. That's going to hopefully get some more written feedback and formalize and more easily to quantify some of the things that people are thinking about. And then, we're going to evaluate where we are. I mean, we want to give recommendations to the board, but we want to make sure that the community is giving a chance to give the feedback and be a part of the conversation. And hopefully we'll be able to do that and by the end of the spring. Before I break anything else out here, I want to make sure that I recognize Vale, they gave us the space to use. We really appreciate that. The KMPD authorized the food that's here, so please make sure you grab some food. I still see some up over there. And obviously all the volunteers on this committee. This is a lot of work to put this together. This is honestly just the beginning. We have a lot of work to do. We're going to, like I said, putting together a survey, things like that. So a lot of people are putting work in together to do this. We want this to be a community conversation. We want everyone to be on board. So whatever steps that we take in the future, it passes resoundingly easily, and everyone's really excited about the steps that we take to move forward together as a community. With that, I will say that please, thank you again for coming. Please take some time here before we leave to put some notes and some thoughts out here. We can take any extra questions here before we break out. But this is the end of the formal presentation before we do that. So I see lots of hands, so we'll take some questions. I saw back there first.
Thanks a lot. This does look like a heck of a lot of work. And so for all the volunteers who made all these graphs and charts to give us this information, thank you. That is a lot. Are there any deadlines, particularly for something like a committee process, that we want to make sure that we don't miss as we're going through this community process to get to the springtime? Right? Is there anything we need to worry about in terms of deadlines for any of the processes that we might want to leave?
So depending on the mechanisms that we use, if I'm recalling correctly from the September board meeting that you all got a link to, that we talked about this with a consultant. Some of the mechanisms do not go on like a November ballot, for example. Other things go into way property taxes are collected. So that's why Measure E in some of the ways that was talked about, because if you want to get it collected and then returned, it has to be happening in timing of mechanisms like that. But I would just say, there's an urgency of what do we want to have, right? And if our volunteer fire chief decided to retire tomorrow, he's the only firefighter, and what would we do then? Right, if he decided that he was not wanting to volunteer. And so there is urgency in ways that are personnel, there are ways that are collecting of revenue. I don't say that there is a drop dead date that we have to meet, but these things take time. And so even if we took a process, it could take 6 months before it all happens and we get ballots out and there's a 45-day election, voting period, things like that. There's just time that it takes. And so we're trying to move quickly, but also responsibly and making sure the community is engaged.
Yeah, you mentioned that there currently is a 4 cents per square foot combustible tax. What is the square footage of combustible area in Kirkwood that applies to?
Do you know that number? I mean,
it
collects about 60. We said like 60,000. Sorry,
65,000.
I mean, we're collecting around $65,000 at 4 cents plus a square foot. So do the math and whatever that is for the square footage.
It will only be 130,000.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So we're talking about the amount of that dollars is in tens of thousands of dollars right now, not doubling it to $1 million to get.
To me, it's one of those things, similar communities to ours, and how they fire department and whatnot. We know Kirkwood, people say what's unique, but there's a lot of small communities in California and across the nation for that matter. But it just seems like we should have some comparison of how other communities, similar size, maybe even Markletville. I mean, it's things in our area, how they actually collect funding, what's their staffing levels, equipment levels. I think those numbers to me are important.
Great. Thanks, noted, and we will work on that. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
We'll mostly have to go at 5:30. Is there something we can send our comment?
Yes. So this is my email address for the district. I will make sure it gets to the committee. It's easiest just to send it to one address. So if you don't have this address readily handy, because my last name is 11 characters and very confusing. You can find this on the KMPD website. If you go to, I think it's about Board of Directors, my email address is there. You hopefully should have received this link to the slide deck. And this is a clickable link that will just draft an email initially. So if you have any other thoughts, questions, feedback about how this went, anything like that, what do you think we should be doing? Please send me an email. I will make sure it gets to everyone on the committee. And we really appreciate feedback. This is a community effort. That's the goal here. We want to hear from you.
Hey, Doug, so, I know everybody wants to go out to Vail, and get Vail continued. But my question is, do we have, data from the pre-Vail people that are at the resort? Because some of us have been here a long time, we've been through other ownership groups. So, you know, you can't just go after the big guys, right? So do we know what was contributed by the previous people that were running there?
I can tell you from 2000, zero. There isn't any been financial support or additional lift ticket, excise taxes or anything.
Agreed. So one more question.
I was wondering if the data will, the kinds of, there's good information on the types of incidents that would be covered with fire and EMS. We have a split of what's covered by ski patrol, Vail, Barton, and what typical, you know, events are covered by that versus what really would be covered under this. You know, the incidents are coming up on a frequent versus, you know, very high frequency on the L would be covered by the other things. But I mean, hopefully we'll understand exactly the split of what's it is.
Before I answer that, I should clarify, we do appreciate Vail and their Epic Promise grant. Every fundraiser, some summer festival or KBFD barbecue is supported by Vail and their operations through grants. So I shouldn't say Vail's not doing something. And the ski resort before that, KMR, under Gary Dirk and Tim Coey and others, they also supported us too. So there is a, you know, a neighborly support there, but financially, like additional taxes on tickets or funds for tickets, there has been. For our operations, we go with the ski resort when they're open, in their summer or winter, our call volume seems to go up. And then when the elbow seasons come, it goes down. And there's no, I don't keep data like, you know, how many single person as a ski resort guest, you know, is on the that had an emergency and we needed to respond to. We just don't keep those records.
And I'll just also note that the metrics that we're showing are for the volunteer fire department, not including any ski patrol accidents or anything like that. Okay. All right. Well, thank you again so much for coming tonight. We really appreciate the time. Please take a few seconds, write some thoughts down for us before you leave. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
That's one question. It's about is there a fine level or false alarms that require emergency response? But John kind of hops in there and address that.